According to Deloitte, 94% of business leaders say AI is critical to success. But for all the investment and experimentation, scaling AI pilots into meaningful enterprise wide results remains the defining leadership challenge. Just because a successful pilot is capable of proving a concept works, scaling it to meet complicated business objectives is not guaranteed. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Analytics Insight podcast, where we talk about the ever evolving tech space. And I'm your host, Priya Dialani. Now, the reason for these failures is not flawed algorithms, but a fundamental mismatch. Building the intelligent systems of tomorrow on the fragmented, data poor foundations of yesterday. Organizations today need to ensure data readiness to avoid failures in model performance, system trust, and strategic alignment. Let's welcome Relational AI Vice President Marco Diciolla, who believes to succeed, CIOs must shift from a data first to a knowledge first approach in order to capitalize on the true benefits of AI. Hi, Marco, how are you doing?
Hi, Priya. Very nice meeting you, and thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise, Marco, I'm doing great. Thank you so much. I hope you are doing great too. And it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast today. And of course, we have been talking so much about AI, agentic AI, generative AI, but eventually, there are certain loopholes or challenges that we come across. I mean, leaders and CIOs come across. So I think with your insights today as to how a knowledge first approach can help them scale their AI initiatives effectively will be very useful for our listeners today. So, let's start by understanding more about relational AI. So, if you could help us understand more about it, it would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure. So, Priya, at the Relational AI, we're really on a mission here, and the mission is to power every decision within the enterprise with intelligence. Okay, and that really means bringing to the modern data stack to the cloud a new set of capability that supports decision intelligence. And look, in a nutshell, what that means is to use technology to make business decision. Okay. Now, I think it's good maybe just for me to tell you a little bit more before I go into more depth of that, how I came to relational AI so that you understand basically why I think now it's the time where we can really support decision across the board. And look, that has been a passion of mine since I was very young. I think since I was a student, I was obsessed pretty much with this idea of like, hey, how can I use, back in the days was really maths, then it's technology to make decisions. So already during my studies, basically, I moved from a very theoretical field onto like medicine and working with cardiologists because I wanted to use the technology to see real life impact. Then I moved on to finance because that's like one of the best way to actually, see the work of technology, right? Like having an impact at scale, but I wasn't happy because that was too niche yet. And that's when I moved actually to Palantir. Palantir, really, the mission there, which is a company I'm sure a lot of your listener probably have heard, was to bring intelligent applications within the enterprise and help enterprise build applications so that they could make better decisions, and I've done that for a while, and then I did that again at Quantum Black, and one thing was very clear, and it's still clear nowadays, which is building applications that support business. It's it's very, very complex, it's very, very messy, and so the question is, why is that? Okay, and the reason is because for building applications that support business, you need to understand business. Okay, you need to be able to understand the type of decisions that business makes. You need to understand how you can support those decisions, what analytics you can make to actually have a better decision systems. And all these things are actually, in the past at least, they've been taken care of by having really, really smart people working and building those applications. And then, a few years ago, there's been a little bit of a shift with the modern data stack where some of the capabilities that are required to build intelligent applications, things like capturing business semantics, capturing knowledge, the ability to make prediction or the ability to make optimization, the ability to really think deeply about a problem. All those capabilities are now being pushed more on the infrastructure layer. Okay. And so what that means is that now it's becoming easier and easier to build applications. And so in my view, the company that will make, the building block of application development part of the infrastructure will be the winner. And that's exactly what relational AI does. It's basically bringing to the infrastructure layer, I bring into the cloud data warehouse layer the type of capabilities that support decision making. And those are usually semantics, those are like prediction, those are prescriptions, those are like graph, those are like rules, and nowadays, of course, Gen AI.
Definitely, Marco, and that was a really great overview. And thank you for breaking that down so clearly. I mean, of course, with the constant advancements and innovations, it's really important how we are executing technology in respective organizations. Because, and I think with relational AI, I think I'm really happy as to, how you really have a strong focus on solving the real world challenges rather than just building technology for just the sake of
Correct.
it. And I'm also glad to understand, you also mentioned about how you basically came up, what's exactly your mantra towards building such systems, and you also highlighted your overall journey. So thank you for sharing that as well. And of course, the AI era is already here, and I think all leaders are racing to move fast and prove that ROI. It's easy to see why, because the promise of automation is so irresistible. But in the rush to scale, many teams is critical first step. Preparing the knowledge their AI depends on. So of course there's a lot of excitement around AI agents today. That's something we have been talking about a lot, agentic AI agents. But many enterprises still struggle to see consistent business value. So, why do you believe this knowledge first approach is becoming more critical than, following the traditional data first AI models?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question, Priya. And look, at least, Gen AI and agents have now been, around for at least a few years. And I do think, it is fair to say, although there is a lot of buzz, as you already, correctly pointed out, and although there is, a lot of talking about it, I like to say the chat GPT moment for the enterprise hasn't happened yet. Right? Like a lot of like consumers are actually day in and day out on ChatGPT. They or other LLMs or tools similar to ChatGPT. They make their decision. I might search actually personal stuff on those large language model, but then you really look at the enterprise, and the story there is very, very different. And so that ChatGPT model moment for the enterprise hasn't. That's how I like to say hasn't happened yet. And then the question is like, why? What's hindering basically the ChatGPT model moment for the enterprise? And I think there are like really a set of three challenges that hinder that at the moment. Okay. And then I'll tell you how basically knowledge fits into those three challenges. The first is data. So these large language models have been, they've done a fantastic job, but they are plateauing very, very quickly because effectively we've finished the data that we can show to them to train those large language models. The public data has basically finished. They've done everything they could with public data. But 80% of the data out there is private data. Okay. So what that means is that these LLMs they've not seen data that is private to the enterprise. Okay. And so they cannot be very, very helpful or useful because they don't understand the data of the enterprise yet. Okay. The second thing is compute. Okay, it's still very, very expensive to do inference, to do long chain reasoning, to do post training. So these things are like things that happen once and then kind of like they are never done again because they are extremely, extremely expensive. So enterprise also like pay a cost for that. And then there is people. And so, there is a set of people, a small set of people that can actually understand, how to, for instance, capture the business context within the enterprise, how to build a semantic layer, how to then feed these concepts to the LLM through prompt, for instance, or to post training. And so those are like three challenges that now are hindering, right, like the adoption of Gen AI models within the enterprise. What happened though when you actually start now building knowledge, okay, within the enterprise to how does knowledge basically tackle some of these challenges? Well, first of all, if you are able to capture the way in which business really think about their business, right? Like okay, the way in which, for instance, the quarter is defined the relational AI starting from February the year, and so the quarter start from February versus January, right? That's an important business knowledge that I need to capture. And so now, for instance, I can actually get that business knowledge to be surfaced, okay, to the LLMs so that they can actually think a little bit better, right? Like they actually understand my business. They understand when I talk about profit, what profit means, right? Like how do I compute the profit within relational AI, not in public domain, right? Like not what's written in the, somewhere in public data, but they understand the business context. So that has a really major implication. As I say, one, they're able to provide you with better and more reliable actually answers. First of all, two, rather than coming up and try to feed them at inference time, right? Like as much context as possible, that context is now provided to them in a structured manner if you can capture knowledge. And so now these agents and Gen AI models can actually use the knowledge to be able to better think, and they are quicker at thinking, which then means that the compute cost goes down. Okay. And then last but not least, there is now this also evolution where these agents and this Gen AI model can really help, in a sense, people to structure and coming up with a structure of that knowledge on their own by actually leveraging the data itself. And so now they're basically getting rid of the limitation of people experts. And so what I'm trying to say is that this knowledge first approach is really like the missing layer of the modern enterprise to make then Gen AI and agents being helpful to the enterprise context and not being a generic tool.
That's a really important distinction that you highlighted, Marco. And I think it gets to the heart of why so many AI initiatives stall after the pilot stage. And I think it also reframes how enterprises should think about AI adoption. I mean, instead of asking, do we have enough data? The more strategic question becomes, do we understand our processes, our decision frameworks, and the knowledge that drives those outcomes? Because without that foundation, even the most advanced models struggle to deliver the meaningful impact. And, this is very important and relevant as every organization is going towards these autonomous and agentic systems. So without the right knowledge, embedding them would become more like a risk and not an advantage. So I think it's really important that organizations understand the value of this knowledge first approach and then accordingly build their long term scalability plans. Moving ahead, I think like many of us, you have seen firsthand the energy AI pilots generate inside these large enterprises. Co-pilots, LLMs, all are bursting with so much of promise. Of course, then we have hackathons, demos, how leadership and buzzwords flood internal slide decks. But after the initial excitement fades, most of those pilots quietly stall. They remain trapped in silos, untouched, unscaled. So, in your work with enterprise team across industries, from whether it's financial, manufacturing, or healthcare, one pattern keeps repeating. It's not the experimentation that's hard, it's what comes next. The transition from experimentation to operationalization, from idea to impact. So, basically, from pilot to successful platform adoption. And you have seen AI adoption at scale across organizations like Quantum Black and now relational AI. What patterns separate companies that move beyond pilots from those that actually get stuck in experimentation?
Yeah, that's another great question, Priya. So thank you for asking that. I still actually remember talking to a very senior, it's actually the CFO, one of the largest telco company in the world, that looked at me as we were talking about a project, and he looked in my eye and almost like crying for help. He told me, Marco, I've got more pilot than Lufthansa. What he meant at that, right? Like that's a telco company. Of course, it's not an airline. He meant like I don't want to hear anymore about like small lab pilot projects that they're all there but they seem to go nowhere. I've got so many of those. It seems every week there is a new pilot that is kicked off, and then yet when you see the bottom line of our business, that has not changed. And so I do think that's like something that is felt. I do think it's felt even more nowadays actually, where technology is being democratized more and more. And so it's one of the most important, I think, burden of the modern enterprise. Now, in principle, proof of concepts and pilots, they sound great. Like because usually those are like somewhat free. They are not asked, usually the supplier never asks for money because you are just proving your concept or it's just a pilot and we show you what we can do. They usually work on some sort of like in the best cases on some synthetic data that don't really resemble the data of the enterprise. They're usually worked solely by the vendors. Usually they want to prove value, right? Like so they don't interact with the experts within the enterprise. They don't interact with the people who actually need to use the tooling. Usually there is no interaction with people who understand the data. And then you are left pretty much with the word of like, hey, this seems to be interesting, but now how do we take that into enterprise ready? And that's usually when you discover, well, the data is very messy. It turns out we need to actually get approval from these 15 different teams. It turns out that this person that actually understood this part of the organization is gone and nobody else knows about it. And so it turns out that then it's a mess and things usually die. And so really, look, the leaders who tackle this successful, they flip the script. Okay, of what I just told you, right? Like they start actually from business first and business value, right? Like, so the first thing, and it goes back to this point of that I made at the very beginning, decision intelligence, right? Like, what decisions do I want to empower through technology and why? And I am going to track. And so they usually set very, very clear metric of what they want to track and what they want to see as uplift or reduction in cost, if that's what they want to do. And so business comes first, and with that means also like involvement of either executives or people who really understand the business. The second point, so that's like the first point, right? Like the second point goes to ownership, and this is as important as the first point. There needs to be ownership since very, very early on within the enterprise. Doing the proof of concept or pilot where you say like, hey, dear vendor, let me see what you can do, usually never works. And for instance, what I say to my teams here at the Relational AI is like, I want to see at least some sort of like ownership and engagement on the other side. It could be even a fictitious dollar amount to say 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 pounds or dollars. But like the moment that there is involvement on the other side, the moment that somebody has actually committed, and is the owner of that initiative, even if it's just, a proof of value, as I call it, not a proof of concept, I call it proof of value. Even if it's just a proof of value, that means that there is now another person within the enterprise that was responsibility is to make the proof of value successful. Not just to sit back and relax, but that person is as incentivized and wants to see success. And so having a clear ownership is extremely, extremely important as you start this, again, pilot or proof of concepts. And then last but not least is building framework to assess quickly real life scenarios, whether something works or cannot work. So I always say, don't start in the lab and then move into the field. So basically, don't try to actually do a project that has almost like nothing to do with the actual business problem that you're trying to solve to then figure out how to bring that, you started in lab and now you bring that into the field, but figure out from the very, very beginning how to do something small enough, but meaningful enough already that is showcasing you in real life operations what's the value of a specific tools or software is. And that's why I call it actually proof of values at a relational AI, not proof of concept, because I'm not proving you a concept. The concept that the technology works has already been proved. And what I'm showing to our partners, right, like and our customers, is I'm showing to them how our technology brings value within their system. And so that's a bit of a shift in mindset, but one that is very, very important. And so I see these three, consistent traits of leaders that really push the boundary of what's possible, which is, anchor AI with decision, basically two decisions and business value, establish clear ownership, and then don't start in the lab, but start in the field.
That's a powerful insight, Marco. And I think, yes, you overall need intent, structure, but alongside, you also need a strong leadership convention. I think that organizations that move beyond pilots seem to treat AI as a core operating capability and not just any technology or any side project. And of course, I also agree with your point that, we really need to get into the field rather than just, talking theoretical and then functioning or operationalizing our entire teams. I think it's important that we really think about what does AI fundamentally change and how value can be created here. And this shift from experimentation to execution feels like the real inflection point for enterprises trying to scale the AI impact. Moving ahead, I think because when we talk about siloed data systems, and we also spoke about how we can, or what are certain limitations that usually people come across when they get stuck in experimentation. But we do need data, and but raw data doesn't drive decisions. What drives is the context, because without a clear understanding of what a data point means, how it was calculated, or where it fits in a broader process, data lacks actionable value. But when we talk about context, I think context, it often gets lost when siloed data is extracted from applications or from different sources. So what's the result? The result is business users struggle to interpret data, AI models underperform, and decisions based on disconnected data often miss the mark. So I think we discussed that, how many enterprises are still functioning in deeply siloed systems across functions. What practical steps you think can leaders can take to get out of that siloed systems and create an ecosystem where everyone can operate cohesively rather than in fragments?
Yes. So again, another great question, Priya. I think the very, very first step here is, deeply understanding the concept of data. Let me explain what I mean here when I say that. Because of course, data is the data that is in a database or in tables. A different form of data is the data that sits potentially in spreadsheets, right? And it's laying around the organization. I think a different type of data is the data that potentially sits into, for instance, application code, where you're writing, manually writing code. That's also kind of like data because it's explaining to you, right, like the type of things that you're doing within the application. How you compute profit, how you compute margin, how you compute a specific calculation. A different type of data that exists as well is the data that exists in people's mind, is the experience, right? Like, is like, hey, I know that because I've been a relational AI for 4 years, that actually, when we really talk about this thing, although it's not written anywhere, I understand that that's what we mean. And so what I'm trying to say here is like data and knowledge, right? Like is really scattered across a variety of different data silos. And we need to start thinking how we actually chop the barriers to that. Again, actually a very renowned CMO of a very, very large company asked me once, like, Marco, this was like 6 months ago, she told me, like, Marco, if you had to say to me in a clear sentence, just in simple, plain English, what's the common enemy, right? That the relational AI is battling, that is common to you and the organization that you work with. What is the common enemy? And the common enemy that I described to her is actually the knowledge silos. And so I do think actually when it comes to data silos, we have done a good job of figuring out, right, like how with the modern data stack and with companies like Snowflake and Google Cloud and Fabric and Microsoft and whatnot, we found a good way to actually be able to organize data, to share data, to get new data, internal data, external data sources. So like we have kind of like done massive progress in figuring out how to make data accessible, right? Like now really the next evolution is figuring out how to take all the knowledge that is sprawled across data, as I say, spreadsheet, people mind, and have a way to start contextualizing it and bringing it, basically structuring that knowledge so that it can be reused, it can be shared, it can be searched, it can be improved, it can be maintained over time, and it becomes a real asset within the organization. And so to do that, we need to start small, right? Like, so we need to start again figuring out which bits of knowledge can we capture today that is readily available. For instance, very commonly that is the knowledge that is part of databases, because databases usually have, they are clearly structured. We know what things mean in the columns and whatnot, and start bringing basically that knowledge up and then extending that bit by bit to other types of knowledge that are less amenable to this structuring that I'm talking about, but that are equally important, like code, Excel spreadsheets, people mind. And so you start small and you incrementally maintain this knowledge base that then becomes one of the most important assets within the enterprise. I would say for both, right? Like people and agents, because agent nowadays, in a sense, that I always say to people, like, you can consider agents as a little intern in your organization, right? You need to teach them how your organization works. And so the knowledge base then becomes the foundation upon which agents learn about yourself as an organization. And so these are like, what I would like to see more and more. I would say that the industry is waking up to that. And I see more and more enterprising starting really thinking about like how to removing the knowledge silo barrier here and starting capturing in a structured format knowledge so that they can reuse it then across the board to make better decisions.
Yes, I agree with you, Marco. And I think with certain practical steps, whether we are unifying data adoptions or piloting AI use cases that cut across departments, I think it's important that we are walking on that track of cutting down on data silos and ensuring that we are able to scale AI effectively and sustainably across the enterprise. I think AI adoption or creating an AI ecosystem is not just about speed or more intentional design. I think we should design keeping in mind the adaptability, transparency, and the long term value rather than some, short term gains eventually. And I think with AI in the picture, we are seeing a lot of AI adoption accelerating, and there are so many things that come into picture. We also need to consider about strong governance as well, because a strong AI governance can provide a robust platform in terms of the processes, standards, and also the guardrails to help ensure that AI systems operate safely and ethically. So, as AI organizations deploy these AI agents across critical workflows, what governance or design principles they should keep in mind so that their AI systems are aligned, explainable, and resilient over time?
Yeah, Priya, thank you again for the question. This is another great one, probably will require a podcast on its own. But the place to start here is like the tech and the world nowadays is really, really moving at a pace that it was never like this before, right? Like, so the acceleration and the coming of new technology, it just happens, before was every few years and it became every year. Now every month there is kind of like new tech, new things coming on board, new agents. And it's really hard, if not impossible, right? Like to stay on top of everything. And so I always say to the executive I speak to that in a sense there is no magic wand, right? Like there is no free lunch. There isn't like the type of thing you do it and it sorts out for you everything. Governance, it ensures that the system remain like aligned. It needs some work that needs to be done, right? Like I mentioned before, like that I consider agents to be a little bit like interns in your organization. Like you need to teach them, you need to get them to mature, you need to provide them information, you need to figure out how to lead them to the best decision possible. And so that process needs to happen, right? Like the more information you give to them, the more you coach them, the better they're going to do. And then with that in mind, right, like there are a few rules in a sense that I always go back, right? Like, because one thing is clear, right? Like the world is moving in the direction where more and more automation, more and more agents are come to bear. And so agents, automations, AI, Gen AI is going to stay, right? It's here to stay. But there are a few things I think that executives should consider as they design their own, their governance, their internal systems, and think about embedding agents for really business critical decisions that sometimes may have really, really big implications, right? Like if we think of fraud, if we think about, giving a loan, these are really, really important decisions that have an impact on people's life. And so it's really important that, executives think deeply about these things. So what are those principles, right? Like, well, the first principle is make sure that you make rules that are important to your business or decisions that are important to your business explicit. What I mean by that, don't let the systems or the agents guess what good looks like. If there is something that is important, make it explicit. You will avoid basically a lot of trouble down the line if you're able to point what good looks like or what a good decision looks like or what are the things that you cannot negotiate, right? Like, don't get them to actually figure it out on their own. The second is ensure that every decision is traceable, right? Like in business terms. So not just technical one. We talk about a lot nowadays with large language model about reasoning traces and being able to query, right? Like and understand how an agent or a large language model has made a decision should be non-negotiable. Because as I say, some of these decisions have really deep and real business impact. And so we want to make sure that we know the chain of thought that led to a specific decision. So traceability is non-negotiable. Third, I always say simulate before you automate. And so, let the system reason about consequences before acting, right? Like, so don't let the system just have the freedom to act on its own. Be able to design what if scenarios, be able to see what it will happen if or when something will happen. And then the fourth is really keep the human in the loop. And, for the time being, what we're talking here, right, like I like to think of Gen AI and again, large language model as the Iron Man suit. Iron Man is for me one of my favorite superheroes, right? Like it's not doesn't have superpower, but it has a suit, right? Like it makes him almost like a superhero. And currently we're at this stage where, this large language model, Gen AI, is really powerful technology here. They're making us almost like superhuman, but we still need to be on the driving seat. And so for a lot of the decisions that are really important to business, don't forget to automate as much as possible, simulate as much as possible. But at the end, when there is a real decision that has an impact, potential impact to people's life, get the human in the loop to validate what the agents are still doing and get that non-negotiable. So this will be my four, I will say, non-negotiable for designing principle to allow that, the agents and the AI that you design within enterprise are governed, they're secure, they're business aligned, they're explainable through the traces and resilient over time.
Definitely, Marco, very well said. And I think to wrap up, the success of AI initiatives is not limited by algorithms, but by the architectural foundation that provides them with high quality and context rich knowledge. The data first era created a deluge of siloed, passive, and ambiguous information, and it has proven to be an unstable foundation for the most trustworthy and scalable AI that businesses now demand. So, you wouldn't build a house without a foundation. The same applies to AI. Your knowledge is the bedrock of trustworthy automation. And it's important we treat it like the strategic asset it is, and we'll be able to see the returns, happier customers, faster resolutions, and lower operating costs. Well, thank you so much, Marco, for taking all the time and effort to be on a podcast today and helping us understand that by aligning technology with human insight and continuous improvisation, I think AI is like a force multiplier. And those who are able to master this approach of the knowledge first approach, I think they will be able to do more than just managing knowledge. They will be able to define the strategic frontier of the information age. Thank you so much for your insights. It was lovely chatting with you, Marco.
Thank you very much, Priya. It was a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. So, this is for our listeners. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion and learned more about the knowledge first approach, and hope you have got a basic understanding or a clear picture of how this knowledge first approach can help you transform your business and grow in the age of AI. Stay tuned for upcoming podcast episodes, and you can view all our previous episodes on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.